Welcome. You've arrived at this quiet moment, a pause in the rhythm of your day. As you settle in, let your body soften, let your thoughts slow, letting the busyness fade, little by little. Tonight, we'll take a slow journey back through time, to an era when the world was sculpted by ice. Out here, the landscape stretched vast and silent, blanketed in snow and shadow. Temperatures could plummet so low that the air itself seemed to still. But even here, families lived with warmth, care, and remarkable ingenuity. They built fires that became the heart of their world, created shelters from bone and hide, and layered furs with precision. They found ways to create spaces where sleep and comfort could exist, even in the harshest cold. Over the next while, we'll move gently through their story. We'll notice how fire provided more than heat, how caves became homes, and how the simple act of sleeping together offered warmth that no single person could create alone. We'll see how generations passed down the knowledge that allowed life to flourish in this frozen world. So, breathe deeply. Let yourself relax, and let the quiet story of Ice Age survival unfold. Imagine, for a moment, a northern winter without flame, no hearth to gather around, no warm glow pushing back the darkness, no way to transform frozen meat into digestible nutrition, no method to harden wooden spears or soften animal hides. The mastery of fire represented a threshold in human history, a line between what was possible and what was not. Before controlled fire, the deep north remained largely impenetrable to human settlement. Small groups might venture into cold regions during summer months, following migrating herds, gathering resources. But when winter arrived in earnest, survival became nearly impossible. The body's metabolic heat, even supplemented by animal skins and natural shelters, could not sustain life through the long frozen nights. Fire changed everything. Not instantly, not dramatically, but completely. It extended the range of habitable territory by thousands of miles. It allowed humans to occupy caves that would otherwise have been too cold for sustained living. It created the possibility of night as something other than a period of huddled, shivering endurance. The control of fire is ancient. Evidence stretches back hundreds of thousands of years, far predating modern humans. Our ancestors, and their ancestors before them, understood fire's potential. But the systematic use of fire for survival in extreme cold, the construction of permanent hearths, and the careful management of fuel through long winters, this became essential for those who would make the Ice Age North their home. The earliest evidence of controlled fire is debated among researchers, but clear signs appear at sites dating back 400,000 years or more. These early fires were likely opportunistic, using naturally occurring flames from lightning strikes or volcanic activity. The challenge was not creating fire, but maintaining it, keeping it alive through wet conditions, through moves from one camp to another, through the countless small crises that could extinguish a flame. Over time, humans developed methods for creating fire on demand. Striking flint against iron pyrite produced sparks that could ignite dry tinder. Friction methods, using wooden drills spun rapidly against wooden bases, generated enough heat to create embers. These techniques were not easy. They required skill, practice, and the right materials. But they transformed fire from something that had to be preserved to something that could be recreated. This ability to create fire changed the relationship between humans and their environment. No longer were people bound to existing flames, constrained by the need to carry fire with them or to camp near active volcanic zones. They could venture into new territories, explore unfamiliar landscapes, and establish camps wherever resources existed, confident in their ability to create warmth when needed. Fire was the first pillar. Without it, the other innovations would have been insufficient. With it, the door to a frozen world stood open, but fire alone was not enough. The heat it provided was localized, radiating outward only a short distance before dissipating into the vast cold. Something more was needed to contain that heat, to create spaces where warmth could accumulate and be preserved. The answer lay in shelter, in structures that could trap the heat produced by fire while blocking the wind that robbed bodies of warmth. Natural shelters existed in the form of caves, but caves were not always available. Humans would need to become builders, to create artificial shelters using the materials their environment provided. This development would represent the second pillar of Ice Age survival. But before we turn to shelter, we must understand more fully what fire meant to these people. We must appreciate the hearth not as a simple campfire, but as a sophisticated system, refined over millennia, designed to extract maximum benefit from the fuels available in a harsh and unforgiving landscape. Imagine, for a moment, a northern winter without flame, no hearth to gather around, no warm glow pushing back the darkness, no way to transform frozen meat into digestible nutrition, no method to harden wooden spears or soften animal hides. The mastery of fire represented a threshold in human history, a line between what was possible and what was not. Before controlled fire, the deep north remained largely impenetrable to human settlement. Small groups might venture into cold regions during summer months, following migrating herds, gathering resources. But when winter arrived in earnest, survival became nearly impossible. The body's metabolic heat, even supplemented by animal skins and natural shelters, could not sustain life through the long frozen nights. Fire changed everything, not instantly, not dramatically, but completely. It extended the range of habitable territory by thousands of miles. It allowed humans to occupy caves that would otherwise have been too cold for sustained living. It created the possibility of night as something other than a period of huddled, shivering endurance. The control of fire is ancient. Evidence stretches back hundreds of thousands of years, far predating modern humans. Our ancestors, and their ancestors before them, understood fire's potential. But the systematic use of fire for survival in extreme cold, the construction of permanent hearths, and the careful management of fuel through long winters, this became essential for those who would make the Ice Age North their home. The earliest evidence of controlled fire is debated among researchers, but clear signs appear at sites dating back 400,000 years or more. These early fires were likely opportunistic, using naturally occurring flames from lightning strikes or volcanic activity. The challenge was not creating fire, but maintaining it, keeping it alive through wet conditions, through moves from one camp to another, through the countless small crises that could extinguish a flame. Over time, humans developed methods for creating fire on demand. Striking flint against iron pyrite produced sparks that could ignite dry tinder. Friction methods, using wooden drills spun rapidly against wooden bases, generated enough heat to create embers. These techniques were not easy. They required skill, practice, and the right materials. But they transformed fire from something that had to be preserved to something that could be recreated. This ability to create fire changed the relationship between humans and their environment. No longer were people bound to existing flames, constrained by the need to carry fire with them or to camp near active volcanic zones. They could venture into new territories, explore unfamiliar landscapes, and establish camps wherever resources existed, confident in their ability to create warmth when needed. Fire was the first pillar. Without it, the other innovations would have been insufficient. With it, the door to a frozen world stood open, but fire alone was not enough. The heat it provided was localized, radiating outward only a short distance before dissipating into the vast cold. Something more was needed to contain that heat, to create spaces where warmth could accumulate and be preserved. The answer lay in shelter, in structures that could trap the heat produced by fire while blocking the wind that robbed bodies of warmth. Natural shelters existed in the form of caves, but caves were not always available. Humans would need to become builders, to create artificial shelters using the materials their environment provided. This development would represent the second pillar of Ice Age survival. But before we turn to shelter, we must understand more fully what fire meant to these people. We must appreciate the hearth not as a simple campfire, but as a sophisticated system, refined over millennia, designed to extract maximum benefit from the fuels available in a harsh and unforgiving landscape. The archaeological record speaks clearly about the importance of fire to Ice Age peoples. Across Europe, Asia, and eventually the Americas, excavations reveal the unmistakable signatures of ancient hearths. Compacted circles of ash, layers of charcoal, stones cracked and reddened by repeated exposure to heat, earth baked hard by centuries of flame. These are not casual campfires, used once and abandoned. These are hearths returned to generation after generation, deepening with accumulated ash, growing more refined in their construction. The people who built them understood that fire required more than simply igniting wood. It required structure, planning, and continuous attention. A hearth typically began with a shallow depression, scooped into the cave floor or dug into the earth of an open-air camp. The depression protected the flame from wind, contained ash and coals, and directed heat upward and outward rather than allowing it to dissipate into the ground. The optimal depth was typically 4 to 8 inches, balancing protection with heat radiation. Around this depression, stones were carefully arranged, not randomly, but with attention to their properties. Certain stones would crack or explode when heated, sending dangerous fragments across the shelter. Others absorbed heat and radiated it steadily for hours, becoming thermal batteries that extended the fire's warmth long after the flames had died down. The selection and placement of hearthstones represented accumulated knowledge, passed from elder to child. The fuel itself demanded attention. In the Ice Age landscape, wood was not always abundant. Trees grew sparsely in the cold environment, often stunted, frequently buried in snow. Families learned which woods burned hottest, which lasted longest, which produced the least smoke in an enclosed space. But wood was not the only fuel. Bone, particularly the long bones of large animals, could be burned when wood was scarce. Animal fat, carefully rendered, provided an intense, long-lasting heat source. Even dried dung served as fuel when available. The hearth accepted what the landscape provided, and skilled hands transformed these materials into warmth. The fire, once established, demanded tending. Someone had to maintain it through the night, adding fuel when flames began to wane, adjusting the arrangement to maximize heat output. This responsibility rotated among family members, a shared duty that ensured the flame never went out. An extinguished fire in the depths of winter was not merely an inconvenience. It was a crisis, potentially a death sentence, if conditions prevented relighting. The construction of an effective hearth followed principles that maximized warmth while minimizing danger. The shallow pit provided the foundation, typically 2 to 4 feet across. Flat stones might line the bottom, while larger stones around the perimeter served as both containment and reflector, their heated surfaces radiating warmth back into the living space. Some hearths incorporated a back wall of stacked stones, creating a vertical surface that reflected heat forward into the shelter. This was particularly effective in cave mouths, where the stone wall behind the fire caught heat that would otherwise have escaped outside. The spacing between the hearth and the sleeping areas was critical. Too close to risk burns from sparks. Too far, and the warmth dissipated. The optimal distance typically fell between 6 and 10 feet, balancing comfort with safety. Ventilation presented another challenge. Fire consumes oxygen and produces smoke. In enclosed shelters, careful design was essential. Cave dwellings benefited from natural air circulation near entrances, where cold air flowed in along the floor while warm, smoke-laden air rose and escaped. Constructed shelters incorporated smoke holes near the top, carefully sized to allow smoke to escape without losing excessive heat. The fuel arrangement within the hearth followed learned patterns. Smaller pieces of kindling formed the base, easy to ignite. Larger pieces were added gradually in a teepee or pyramid shape, allowing air to circulate while maintaining contact between burning and unburned material. As the fire burned, it created a bed of coals beneath the active flames. These coals, glowing red or orange, produced intense heat with minimal smoke. Experienced fire tenders maintained a thick bed of coals while feeding just enough wood to keep flames alive. The coals also served as insurance even if flames died out. Hot coals could be revived with dry tinder and gentle breath. The ground beneath the hearth absorbed heat throughout the evening. Stone and earth, warmed by hours of fire, became thermal reservoirs that continued radiating warmth long after the flames had been banked for the night. Sleeping near this warmed ground provided additional comfort that complemented the direct heat of the fire. The warmth provided by a hearth was its most obvious gift, but far from its only contribution to survival. The fire served multiple functions, each essential, each interconnected with the others, in ways that made the hearth truly central to Ice Age existence. Light was perhaps the second most immediate benefit. The Pleistocene night was absolute in its darkness. No street lamps, no distant city glow, no artificial illumination of any kind. When the sun set, the world plunged into a blackness that modern humans, living in light-saturated environments, can scarcely imagine. The moon, when visible, provided some relief, but cloud cover or the moon's absence left the landscape in total obscurity. The quality of this darkness is difficult to convey. In modern rural areas, even far from cities, there is usually some ambient light. The sky itself retains a faint glow from scattered light pollution, but in the Ice Age, the darkness was complete. Stepping away from a fire meant entering a void where visions ceased to function, where even familiar surroundings became alien and threatening. Fire pushed back this darkness. The flames created a sphere of visibility, a pocket of light that allowed work to continue after sunset. The radius of useful light extended perhaps 15 to 20 feet from a typical hearth, creating a circle of civilization within which life could proceed normally. Beyond this circle, the darkness pressed close, but within it, humans remained functional. Tools could be repaired by firelight, stone blades could be knapped, and flint struck against flint to create sharp edges. Wooden shafts could be straightened using heat and pressure. Bone needles could be sharpened on stone abraders. Hide could be worked, scraped clean, treated with oils or brains to soften it. All of this work could continue in the evening, extending the productive hours of the day and making efficient use of time that would otherwise be lost to darkness. The light enabled social interaction, allowing family members to see each other's faces, to communicate through gesture as well as voice, to maintain the visual connections that strengthen human bonds. Much of human communication is non-verbal, dependent on facial expressions, posture, and gesture. In complete darkness, this rich channel of communication closes. Fire kept it open, allowing the subtle social negotiations that maintain group cohesion to continue uninterrupted. But the light served another purpose, one related to safety rather than productivity. The Ice Age landscape was home to formidable predators, cave lions, massive cats that dwarfed modern lions, hunted in packs and were perfectly adapted to cold environments. Cave hyenas, larger and more powerful than their African relatives, scavenged and hunted across the glacial steppes. Wolves, already well adapted to cooperative hunting, competed with humans for prey and occasionally saw humans themselves as potential food. These animals, equipped with night vision far superior to human sight, found darkness to be an ally in hunting. They could move silently through the night, approaching close before their prey became aware of danger. A sleeping human band, without fire, would be vulnerable to such approaches, unable to detect predators, until they were already within striking distance. Fire changed this dynamic. Predators, instinctively cautious of unfamiliar phenomena, typically avoided flames. The flickering light created confusing visual signals that disrupted their night vision. The smell of smoke was alien and concerning, associated with forest fires and other dangers. The crackling sounds of burning wood, the occasional pop of an exploding knot or pocket of sap, created auditory warnings that made a stealthy approach difficult. Not all predators were deterred absolutely. A sufficiently hungry or bold animal might approach despite the fire, but the fire provided a warning, creating noise and light that would alert sleeping humans to danger, while the threat was still at a distance. This early warning system, combined with weapons like spears and the defensive advantage of a prepared position, made humans a difficult and dangerous target even for the largest predators. The fire also served as the primary tool for food preparation. Raw meat, while nutritious, is difficult to digest and potentially dangerous if contaminated with parasites or bacteria. The human digestive system, while capable of processing raw meat, functions far more efficiently with cooked food. Cooking breaks down the tough protein fibers in muscle tissue, making the meat easier to chew and digest. It denatures proteins, making their amino acids more accessible to digestive enzymes. The difference in caloric availability is significant. Raw meat might yield 70% of its theoretical caloric content, while cooked meat approaches 90% or higher. In an environment where calories are precious and food sources are unpredictable, this difference is substantial. It means that the same hunt, the same amount of meat, provides significantly more energy when cooked than when eaten raw. Cooking also neutralizes pathogens. Bacteria, parasites, and other organisms that might cause disease are destroyed by heat. Trichinella spiralis, a parasitic worm found in bear and wild boar meat, causes severe illness if consumed but is killed by thorough cooking. Various bacterial infections, potential sources of debilitating diarrhea and fever, are prevented by proper food preparation. Plants, too, benefited from fire's attention. Many plant foods contain compounds that are toxic or difficult to digest in their raw state. Heat neutralizes these compounds, rendering previously inedible foods not only safe but nutritious. Tubers and roots, staple foods in many environments, become far more digestible when cooked. The starches they contain gelatinize under heat, breaking down into simpler sugars that the body can process easily. Root vegetables, in particular, become far more valuable as calories when roasted in hot ashes. A raw tuber might be tough and bitter, difficult to digest and potentially toxic. The same tuber, buried in hot ashes for an hour, becomes soft, sweet, and nutritious. The transformation is remarkable, turning marginal food sources into valuable ones. The fire served industrial purposes as well. Heat could be used to straighten wooden shafts for spears, making them more accurate and effective. Green wood, slightly damp, could be heated and bent, then held in position until it cooled and retained the new shape. Crooked shafts became straight, improving the weapon's balance and flight characteristics. Fire hardened the tips of wooden points, creating weapons that could pierce hide and flesh. The process involved carefully heating the point until the surface began to char, then removing it from the heat before significant material was lost. This surface hardening created a point that was significantly more durable than untreated wood, able to withstand impacts that would shatter a regular wooden tip. Heat made bone more workable, allowing the creation of needles, awls, and other essential tools. Bone, when heated gradually, becomes slightly more plastic, easier to carve and shape. The heating had to be controlled carefully. Too much heat, and the bone would char and become brittle. Just enough, and it softened slightly, allowing finer work and more detailed shaping. Hides, when smoked over a fire, became softer and more resistant to rot and insects. The smoking process involved hanging prepared hides over a smoky fire, allowing the smoke to penetrate the hide's fibers. The compounds in smoke, particularly from certain woods, acted as natural preservatives and insecticides. They also gave the hide a pleasant smell and improved its texture, making it more comfortable to wear. Beyond these practical functions, the hearth served a psychological role that was perhaps as important as its physical contributions. The fire represented constancy in an uncertain world. It was a living presence, requiring care and attention, but offering in return a reliable source of comfort. The fire had a rhythm, a pattern of behavior that became familiar and reassuring. Gathering around the fire became a ritual, a daily affirmation of safety and community. As darkness fell and the temperature dropped, the family would naturally gravitate toward the hearth, drawn by its warmth and light. This gathering was not forced or formal but emerged naturally from the fire's benefits. It created a daily moment of togetherness, a time when the family was united in one place, focused on a common center. Around the hearth, stories were told. Knowledge was passed from generation to generation. The elders, those who had survived many winters and accumulated vast practical wisdom, would share their experiences. They would describe hunting techniques that had proven successful, warning signs of changing weather, and the properties of different plants and animals. This oral tradition, transmitted fireside, was the primary method of education in a world without writing. Children learned by watching adults work. A child sitting by the fire would see hides being scraped, tools being made, and food being prepared. The child would absorb these skills gradually, first by observation, then by imitation under supervision, and finally by independent practice. The fire provided the light and warmth that made this education possible, extending learning opportunities beyond the short daylight hours. The glow of the flames illuminated faces, revealing emotions, strengthening connections. Human beings are intensely social creatures, dependent on subtle social cues for cooperation and group cohesion. The ability to see each other's expressions, to read emotions and intentions, is fundamental to human interaction. The fire's light preserved this ability after dark, allowing social bonds to be maintained and reinforced. In the depths of winter, when the world outside was hostile and unforgiving, the fire represented home. It was the difference between a cave and a dwelling, between a temporary shelter and a place where life could flourish. The fire transformed space, creating warmth not just physically, but emotionally. It was the heart of the home, in both literal and figurative senses. The hearth was where decisions were made, where conflicts were resolved, where celebrations occurred. It was the stage for daily life, the backdrop against which human existence played out. When meat was plentiful, the fire cooked feasts that brought joy and satisfaction. When resources were scarce, the fire still provided warmth and light, a reminder that survival continued, that the family endured. The fire did not merely keep people alive, it created the conditions for life to have meaning, for culture to develop, for humanity to flourish, even in the harshest conditions imaginable. This was fire's greatest gift, not the warmth it provided to the body, but the warmth it brought to human existence itself. Fire alone could not sustain life through an ice age winter. The heat it provided radiated outward, warming the air immediately around the hearth, but dissipating quickly into the vast cold. A person could sit near a fire and feel warmth on the side facing the flames, while the other side remained exposed to freezing air. Step away from the hearth, and the cold reasserted itself within moments. What was needed was a way to capture and hold warmth, to create barriers that trapped heat near the body and blocked the wind that stole it away. The answer lay in the materials that the Ice Age landscape provided. Animals, plants, earth, and stone all offered resources that, when understood and processed correctly, could be transformed into insulation and protection. This transformation required knowledge. A dead animal was not automatically clothing. A pile of grass was not automatically bedding. Raw materials had to be processed, shaped, and combined in specific ways to serve human needs. This processing was the second pillar of Ice Age survival, as essential as fire itself. The people who mastered these materials understood them deeply. They knew which animal hides made the best outer garments and which were suited for inner layers. They knew how to treat hides so they remained soft and pliable even in extreme cold. They knew which plants provided the best insulation and when to harvest them for optimal properties. This knowledge was not written down. It existed in the hands and minds of those who practiced it, passed from parent to child through demonstration and practice. A young person learning to prepare a hide would work alongside an experienced adult, watching, imitating, and gradually developing the skills through repetition. The knowledge was embodied, carried in muscle memory, and practiced judgment. The materials themselves varied by region. What was abundant in one area might be scarce in another. Ice Age peoples adapted to their local resources, developing techniques suited to what their environment offered. But certain principles remained constant across regions. The need for insulation, for wind protection, for moisture management applied everywhere cold existed. The processing of these materials required tools, and the creation of tools required additional materials and knowledge. Stone had to be knapped into sharp blades for cutting hide. Bone had to be carved into scrapers for cleaning flesh from skins. The development of material processing technology was therefore iterative, each advance enabling further advances, each tool allowing the creation of better tools. The transformation of an animal hide into usable material began the moment a hunt succeeded. The hide had to be removed carefully to avoid cuts or tears that would compromise its integrity. Skinning was skilled work, requiring knowledge of the animal's anatomy and careful knife work to separate hide from flesh without damaging either. Fresh hide was heavy, wet, and covered with fat and tissue. Left untreated, it would rot within days, becoming useless. The first step in preservation was to remove all flesh and fat from the inner surface. This was done with scrapers, tools typically made from stone or bone with a sharp, curved edge. The scraper was drawn across the hide repeatedly, removing tissue in thin layers. This scraping was physically demanding work. A large hide, perhaps from a horse or reindeer, might require hours of sustained effort. The work had to be thorough. Any fat or tissue left on the hide would prevent proper treatment and could lead to rot or insect infestation. The scraping also had to be careful. Too much pressure and the scraper could cut through the hide itself, creating holes that would weaken the final product. Once scraped clean, the hide had to be treated to make it soft and prevent it from becoming stiff as it dried. Several methods existed for this treatment. One common approach involved rubbing the hide with animal brains. The brain tissue contains oils and enzymes that break down the proteins in the hide, making it supple. The hide was worked repeatedly, stretched and manipulated while the brain mixture was rubbed into every part of the surface. Another method involved soaking the hide in water mixed with certain plant materials, particularly tree bark containing tannins. These compounds chemically altered the hide's structure, making it resistant to decay and maintaining its flexibility. The soaking process could take days or even weeks, requiring patience and attention. Smoking was often the final step in hide preparation. The treated hide was hung over a smoky fire, allowing the smoke to penetrate the material thoroughly. The smoke added additional preservation properties, helping to repel insects and prevent mold. It also gave the hide a pleasant smell, and often a golden or brown colour that many found attractive. The entire process, from fresh hide to finished leather, required substantial time and skill. A single hide might represent several days of work, but the result was a material that could be sewn into clothing, used for bedding, fashioned into containers, or employed in countless other ways. The hide was no longer simply animal skin. It had been transformed into a versatile material, adapted to human needs. Different hides served different purposes based on their properties. Reindeer and caribou hides, with their dense, hollow-haired fur, provided the best insulation for clothing. The fur could be left on, creating garments that trapped air and retained body heat with remarkable efficiency. These hides were prized above all others for winter clothing. Horsehide was tougher and less insulating but more durable. It made excellent outer layers for footwear or for sections of clothing that received heavy wear. Bison hide, thick and strong, served well for ground covers or for the exterior of shelters, where durability mattered more than flexibility. Smaller animals provided hides for specialized purposes. Fox fur, particularly from Arctic foxes with their dense winter coats, made excellent trim for hood openings, protecting the face from wind while preventing breath moisture from freezing into ice. Rabbit and hare skins, while not particularly durable, were soft and warm, suitable for inner layers or for children's clothing. The processing of hides was never-ending work. As clothing wore out or was damaged, new pieces had to be prepared. As the family grew, additional garments were needed. The work filled much of the time that was not devoted to hunting or gathering food. It was essential work, as vital to survival as the hunt itself. Among all the tools developed by Ice Age peoples, few had as profound an impact on survival as the eyed needle. This small implement, typically made from bone or ivory, was revolutionary in its implications. Before the needle, clothing consisted primarily of draped hides, wrapped around the body and secured with ties or pins. Such garments provided some protection, but allowed significant heat loss through gaps and openings. The eyed needle changed everything. With it, pieces of hide could be stitched together tightly, creating garments that fit the body closely and sealed out the cold. The needle enabled the creation of sleeves that covered arms completely, of pants that protected legs, of hoods that shielded heads. It allowed the construction of boots with sewn seams that kept out snow and moisture. The needles themselves were marvels of craftsmanship. Creating one required patience and considerable skill. A piece of bone, typically from a large bird or a small mammal, was selected for its grain and density. The bone was carved into a thin, elongated shape using stone tools. This shaping alone could take hours, as the bone had to be reduced carefully to avoid breaking it. The eye of the needle presented the greatest challenge. A hole had to be drilled or carved through the bone near one end, large enough to accept a thread, but not so large as to weaken the needle. The tools for this were simple but required steady hands and patience. A sharp stone point might be used to begin the hole, twisted carefully to carve into the bone. Alternatively, a small bow drill could create the opening, and the drill bit spins rapidly to grind through the material. The finished needle was smooth, with no rough edges that might catch or tear thread. The point was sharp enough to pierce hide without excessive force. The eye was smooth and rounded to prevent cutting the thread as it passed through. A well-made needle was a treasured possession, used carefully and kept safe when not in use. Thread for sewing came primarily from sinew, the tough connective tissue found in animal bodies. The sinew from along the spine or from the legs of large animals was particularly valued. This tissue was carefully removed during butchering, then cleaned and dried. When needed, it was split into thin strands that could be threaded through the needle's eye. Sinew had remarkable properties as thread. When dry, it was stiff and easy to work with. When moistened, it became pliable and could be pulled tight. As it dried again after sewing, it would shrink slightly, tightening the seam and creating a remarkably strong, waterproof join. Seams sewn with sinew and properly sealed could keep out wind and moisture even in the worst conditions. The sewing process required care and attention. The pieces of hide to be joined were positioned precisely, edges aligned. The needle pierced through both pieces, the thread pulled through, creating a series of stitches that held the pieces together. Different stitch patterns served different purposes. A simple running stitch was quick and adequate for many applications. A whip stitch, wrapping over the edge of the material, created a stronger seam for high-stress areas. For waterproof seams, particularly important in footwear, the stitching was especially tight, each stitch close to the next, and the seam might be sealed with fat or resin to ensure no moisture could penetrate. These seams represented the difference between feet that stayed dry and warm versus feet that became wet, leading to frostbite and potential death. The eyed needle made possible the creation of layered clothing systems. An inner layer could be sewn to fit snugly against the body, trapping air warmed by body heat. An outer layer, looser fitting, could be added over the top, creating an air space that provides additional insulation. Openings at wrists, ankles, and neck could be made small and tight, with drawstrings or ties to seal them closed. Evidence for this sophisticated clothing comes from several sources. Needles themselves are found frequently at Ice Age sites, their distribution and abundance indicating their importance. Some sites, particularly in Russia, have yielded hundreds of needles, suggesting that needle making and sewing were constant activities. More dramatically, certain burials preserve evidence of clothing directly. The famous burials at Sunghir, dated to approximately 24,000 years ago, included bodies adorned with thousands of ivory beads. These beads had been sewn onto clothing, and their arrangement, preserved in the grave, allows researchers to reconstruct what was worn. The evidence points to complete outfits including tunics, pants, caps and boots, all carefully tailored and decorated. This burial evidence reveals that Ice Age clothing was not merely functional but also carried social and artistic significance. The hours required to create and attach thousands of beads represented a substantial investment of time and effort. The clothing was not just protection from the elements but also a statement of identity, status, and cultural values. The principle behind effective cold weather clothing is simple: trap air. Air is an excellent insulator when it is still. Moving air, wind, strips away body heat rapidly. But air that is trapped in small pockets, held close to the body, can be warmed by body heat and will retain that warmth. Ice Age peoples understood this principle, perhaps not in modern scientific terms, but through practical experience. They developed clothing systems that maximized trapped air while minimizing wind penetration. The key was layering and the use of materials with natural air-trapping properties. Caribou and reindeer fur provided the best natural insulation available. Each hair shaft is hollow, containing a core of air. A single hide contains millions of these hairs, creating millions of tiny air pockets. The fur itself is also dense, the hairs packed closely together, creating additional insulation through the air trapped between hairs. The hollow structure of the hairs made caribou fur remarkably light for its warmth. A thick caribou hide provided exceptional insulation without the weight of solid material. This was important because heavy clothing, while warm, restricted movement and caused fatigue, caribou fur allowed freedom of movement while providing the warmth needed for survival. The orientation of the fur mattered. For inner layers, fur was often worn with the hair facing inward, against the skin. This created a soft, warm surface that felt comfortable and trapped body-heated air directly against the body. The skin side of the hide, facing outward in this configuration, provided a smooth surface that allowed an outer layer to slide over it easily. For outer layers, the fur faced outward. This provided maximum protection against wind, as the dense fur prevented air penetration. It also shed snow and moisture more effectively than exposed skin. Snow landing on fur would remain on the surface, easily brushed off, rather than melting against body heat and soaking into the material. The space between layers was as important as the layers themselves. A garment worn directly against the skin traps one layer of warmed air. A second garment, worn loosely over the first, created an additional airspace between the two layers. This second airspace, warmed by heat radiating from the inner layer, provided significant additional insulation. The thickness of this airspace had to be optimized. Too thin, and the insulating benefit was minimal. Too thick, and convection currents could develop within the space, moving cooler air down and warmer air up, reducing the insulating effect. The optimal thickness, learned through experience, was typically about 1/2 inch to 1 inch. Openings in clothing were potential pathways for heat loss. Warm air from inside the garment could escape through gaps, while cold air could enter. Ice Age clothing addressed this through careful design. Sleeves were long and snug at the wrists. Some garments may have had mittens attached directly to the sleeves, eliminating the wrist opening. Necklines were high and could be closed tightly with drawstrings or ties. Hoods extended over the head and could be drawn close around the face, leaving only the eyes, nose, and mouth exposed. Even these openings might be protected by a fringe of fur that helped trap warmed, exhaled air near the face. Lower body clothing followed similar principles. Pants, sewn to fit snugly, trapped air along the legs. The pants might extend into attached footwear, eliminating the ankle opening where cold could penetrate. Alternatively, the pants would overlap with boot tops, creating a sealed system. The layering system was flexible, allowing adjustment to conditions. During periods of high activity, when the body generated substantial heat, outer layers could be removed to prevent overheating and sweating. Sweat was dangerous in cold climates because moisture reduced the insulating properties of clothing dramatically. Wet fur or hide lost much of its effectiveness, and the evaporation of moisture cooled the body rapidly. During rest periods, or when temperatures dropped, additional layers could be added. A person might wear 1 layer while active, 2 layers while resting, and 3 layers while sleeping. This flexibility allowed the clothing system to function across a range of temperatures and activity levels. The maintenance of clothing was constant. Furs needed to be dried regularly, as body moisture, even in small amounts, would gradually accumulate. Drying was typically done near the fire, but carefully, as excessive heat could damage the hide. The fur would be brushed to restore its loft, fluffing the hairs to maximize air trapping. Seams were inspected regularly for wear or damage. A tear in a seam could allow cold air to penetrate, compromising the entire garment. Small repairs were made immediately, before they could worsen. Larger damage might require replacing entire sections, cutting out the damaged area, and sewing in a patch. Ice buildup was another concern. Breath moisture could condense and freeze on fur near the face. Snow could work its way into gaps and melt against body heat, then refreeze into ice. This ice had to be removed regularly, knocked or scraped away, to prevent it from compromising the insulation or adding uncomfortable weight to the clothing. Clothing protected the body from air temperature and wind, but another source of heat loss presented an equally serious challenge: the ground itself. A person lying directly on frozen earth would lose heat through conduction far faster than someone suspended in cold air. The ground acted as an enormous heat sink, capable of absorbing body heat continuously throughout the night. Ice Age peoples understood this problem and developed solutions that created barriers between sleeping bodies and the cold ground. The construction of a proper sleeping area was as important to survival as good clothing. The first step was elevation. Rather than sleeping directly on the floor, sleeping areas were raised on platforms. These might be constructed from stones or wooden planks, creating a raised surface separated from the ground by airspace. This air gap provided insulation, breaking the conductive pathway between sleeper and frozen earth. On top of the platform or elevated area, insulating materials were layered systematically. The first layer consisted of branches, particularly from Arctic willow or other shrubs. The branches were laid thickly, creating a cushion that compressed slightly under body weight, but maintained air spaces throughout. Branches with many twigs created more complex structures with more trapped air. On top of the branches, plant materials formed the next layer. Grasses, sedges, and mosses were gathered during warmer months and dried for winter use. When piled thickly, these materials created a soft mattress that was remarkably effective at trapping air. A layer 6 to 12 inches thick would compress to perhaps 3 to 6 inches under use, maintaining substantial insulation. Certain plants were particularly valued. Grasses with hollow stems provided built-in air pockets. Mosses held air effectively and had natural antimicrobial properties. These materials had to be kept dry, as moisture would compress them and reduce insulation dramatically. On top of the plant layer came the hide and fur bedding that created the actual sleeping surface. Less valuable hides might be placed first as protective layers. The sleeping furs themselves were the finest available caribou, with its superior insulating properties, was preferred. The hides were layered, creating a soft, warm nest. Some furs served as mattresses, laid out to create the sleeping surface. Others served as blankets, covering the sleeper from above. The sleeper was thus surrounded by fur, creating a cocoon of trapped air warmed by body heat. The combination of elevation, branches, plant materials, and multiple fur layers created a sleeping system that could keep a person warm through even the coldest nights. The sleeping area was typically positioned at a specific distance from the hearth, close enough to benefit from radiant heat but far enough to avoid danger. The platform's elevation also helped with positioning, placing the sleeper at a height where warm air rising from the fire would circulate around them. In family settings, sleeping areas were often communal, with multiple people sharing a large platform and common bedding. This arrangement served both practical and social purposes, representing the third pillar of Ice Age survival, the warmth of community itself. The technologies of fire, shelter, and clothing created the conditions for survival, but they were amplified by something that required no tools and no materials: the simple act of sleeping close together. Humans are warm-blooded mammals, constantly generating heat through metabolic processes. A solitary person loses this heat to the surrounding environment at a steady rate. But when multiple people sleep in close contact, the dynamics change dramatically. Each human body produces heat equivalent to roughly a 100-watt light bulb, a continuous output of thermal energy that radiates into the surrounding space. When people sleep apart, each person's heat dissipates independently into the cold air. But when they sleep together, their individual heat outputs combine, creating a shared thermal environment that is warmer than any single person could achieve alone. This principle is known as social thermal regulation, and it is practiced by countless species, from emperor penguins huddling through Antarctic storms to wolf pups pressed together in their den. Ice Age humans were no exception. The practice was not merely practical but instinctive, rooted in mammalian biology that stretches back millions of years before the first humans walked the Earth. A typical Ice Age family group might consist of 15 to 30 individuals. Parents with their children, perhaps grandparents, possibly siblings of the adults with their own families. This extended family would share living space, coordinate their activities, and pool their resources. At night, they would sleep together, their bodies arranged in a communal sleeping area that maximized warmth sharing. The arrangement was not random. The most vulnerable members, those who generated less heat or lost it more quickly, were positioned in the center of the group. Infants and young children, with their small bodies and high surface area relative to mass, lost heat rapidly. They would be placed in the middle, surrounded by adults on all sides. The adults formed a living barrier, their bodies blocking cold air from reaching the children while their heat radiated inward. Elderly individuals, who might have reduced circulation or lower metabolic rates, would also be positioned in protected areas. The robust adults, those with the highest heat output and best tolerance for cold, occupied the outer positions. This arrangement was not enforced through rules but emerged naturally from concern for family members and practical experience of what worked. The spacing between bodies was close but not uncomfortable. People would sleep touching or nearly touching, close enough that the warmth from one body could be felt by the next. The shared blankets and furs covering the group created a tent-like space beneath them, trapping the warm air rising from all the bodies. This space became a microclimate, several degrees warmer than the ambient air of the shelter. The temperature difference was measurable and significant. Where the shelter air might be just above freezing, the space beneath the shared furs could be 10 or even 15 degrees warmer. This difference placed the sleeping group well above the threshold where hypothermia becomes a danger, creating conditions where true rest was possible. The sleeping positions also provided psychological comfort. Physical closeness to family members, particularly for children, created a sense of safety and security. The rhythmic breathing of others, the small movements and adjustments of sleeping bodies, provided constant unconscious reassurance that one was not alone, that the group remained intact and protective. For adults, this closeness reinforced social bonds. Sleeping together night after night, sharing warmth and space, created intimacy and trust. The vulnerability of sleep, when consciousness fades and threats cannot be detected or defended against, was mitigated by the presence of others who would remain alert or wake at the first sign of danger. The arrangement also had practical benefits for nighttime needs. If a child woke and needed attention, a parent was immediately present. If someone needed to tend the fire or make adjustments to bedding or clothing, they could do so without disturbing everyone. The family functioned as a unit even in sleep, each member contributing to the collective survival. This communal sleeping was not optional or exceptional. It was the standard arrangement, practiced night after night throughout the winter. Privacy as a concept had different meaning in this context. The closeness was normal, expected, and essential. Cultural norms developed around this proximity, defining appropriate behavior and maintaining respect even in such intimate conditions. The warmth generated by sleeping together extended beyond the sleeping period itself. As family members began to wake, their increased activity and metabolism produced more heat, warming the shared space further. The transition from sleep to wakefulness occurred gradually, in a warm environment that made the process comfortable rather than a sudden shock of cold. The warmth of community extended beyond physical proximity during sleep. It encompassed the entire structure of Ice Age survival, which depended on cooperation, division of labor, and the transmission of knowledge across generations. No individual possessed all the skills needed for survival. No single person could accomplish all the necessary tasks. Success required the coordinated effort of the group. The preparation for winter began long before the cold arrived. During warmer months, the family would disperse their efforts across multiple essential activities. Some members would focus on hunting, tracking the herds of reindeer, horse, or bison that provided meat and hides. Others would gather plant materials, collecting grasses for bedding, roots for food, wood for fuel. The processing of resources was similarly divided. Men often handled the hunting, their greater upper body strength suited to throwing spears and carrying heavy game. Women typically took primary responsibility for hide processing, a task that required patience and dexterity more than raw strength. But these divisions were not rigid. When necessary, roles could shift, and individuals might perform any task the situation demanded. Children participated in this labor from an early age. Young children might help gather plant materials, collecting grasses or small pieces of wood under adult supervision. As they grew, they would take on more complex tasks, learning through observation and imitation. A child watching an adult scrape a hide would gradually absorb the technique, the rhythm, the judgment of how much pressure to apply. This apprenticeship model was the primary method of education. Skills were not taught through verbal instruction alone, but through demonstration and supervised practice. A young person learning to knap stone would sit beside an experienced knapper, watching the angle of strikes, the force applied, the way the stone was held and rotated. Then they would try themselves, receiving guidance and correction until the skill became natural. The knowledge being transmitted was vast. It included practical skills like hide processing, tool making, and fire management. It encompassed environmental knowledge, understanding of weather patterns, animal behavior, plant properties, and seasonal changes. It included social knowledge, the customs and expectations that maintained group cohesion and resolved conflicts. This knowledge existed in the minds and practices of the community. It was not written down, not formalized into explicit rules. It was embodied in the way things were done, the way problems were solved, the accumulated wisdom of generations. When an elder died, a lifetime of refined understanding died with them, unless it had been successfully passed to younger generations. This made the transmission of knowledge a continuous priority. Elders were valued not primarily for their ability to contribute labor, which declined with age, but for their knowledge and experience. A grandmother who could no longer hunt or process hides could still guide younger members, correcting their techniques, explaining why certain methods worked better than others. Stories served as another vehicle for knowledge transmission. Around the evening fire, elders would recount hunting expeditions, describing successful techniques or warning of dangers. They would tell of past winters, how the family had survived particularly harsh conditions, what strategies had proven effective. These stories were not merely entertainment, but practical education disguised in narrative form. The younger generation absorbed these lessons, storing them against future need. A teenager hearing about how the family survived when a sudden storm trapped them away from their main shelter would remember the story years later when facing similar circumstances. The knowledge was contextual, attached to memorable narratives that made it easier to retain and recall. This social transmission of knowledge created cultural continuity. Techniques refined over hundreds or thousands of years were preserved and passed forward, each generation building on the accumulated wisdom of their ancestors. The survival system was not static but evolving, with successful innovations being adopted and unsuccessful ones being discarded. The division of labor also created interdependence that strengthened social bonds. A skilled hunter depended on others to process the hides from their kills. A skilled hide worker depended on hunters to provide materials. This mutual reliance created incentives for cooperation and made individual survival impossible without the group. When resources were obtained, they were typically shared. A successful hunt provided meat for the entire family, not just the hunter who made the kill. Hides, once processed, might be distributed based on need rather than on who did the processing. This sharing was not altruism in the modern sense, but practical recognition that individual survival depended on group survival. The social structure that enabled this cooperation was maintained through various mechanisms. Elders held authority based on experience and knowledge. Disputes were resolved through discussion and consensus rather than force. Individuals who contributed to the group's welfare gained status and respect. Those who failed to contribute or who created conflict faced social pressure to change their behavior. This social organization was itself a survival technology, as important as any physical tool or technique. It created the conditions under which individuals would cooperate, share resources, and work together toward common goals. Without it, the physical technologies of fire, shelter, and clothing would have been insufficient. The story of Ice Age survival did not begin with modern humans. Long before Homo sapiens arrived in the coldest regions of Europe and Asia, these lands were home to our closest extinct relatives, the Neanderthals. They were the original pioneers of the glacial north, and their success provides important context for understanding how survival in extreme cold became possible. Neanderthals evolved in Europe and Western Asia during earlier glacial periods, their anatomy shaped by hundreds of thousands of years of adaptation to cold climates. Their bodies reflected this in ways modern humans did not share. They were stockier and more robust, with shorter limbs relative to their torso size. This body plan reduced surface area relative to body mass, minimizing heat loss. Their barrel-shaped chests housed large lungs, and their large nasal cavities may have helped warm incoming air before it reached the lungs. But biology alone was not sufficient. Neanderthals survived through both anatomy and culture. The archaeological evidence makes this clear. Neanderthal sites across Europe and the Middle East reveal sophisticated use of fire, careful selection of shelters, and complex tool technologies. The hearths at Neanderthal sites are deep and well constructed, showing evidence of repeated use over long periods. Layers of ash several feet thick indicate that the same locations were used as hearths for generations, suggesting permanent or semi-permanent occupation. The Neanderthals understood fire as thoroughly as modern humans would later. Their stone tools were sophisticated, made using techniques that required substantial skill. The levallois method, commonly associated with Neanderthals, involved carefully preparing a stone core so that a finished tool could be struck off with a single blow. They also created tools from bone and wood, including wooden spears hardened in fire and sharpened to points. The evidence for Neanderthal clothing is less direct, and this is where significant differences may have existed. Bone needles, the telltale sign of sewn-fitted clothing, are rare at Neanderthal sites. This scarcity has led many researchers to conclude that Neanderthal clothing was likely simpler than that of modern humans. Perhaps draped hides secured with ties rather than tailored garments with sewn seams. If this interpretation is correct, it would have created a meaningful difference in cold tolerance. Draped clothing, while providing substantial warmth, allows more air circulation and creates gaps where heat can escape. Fitted, sewn clothing seals these gaps, trapping warm air more effectively and providing superior protection in the most extreme conditions. This tailoring gap might not have mattered during moderate cold, but during the coldest periods of glaciation, it could have been significant. Yet Neanderthals survived and thrived for hundreds of thousands of years in environments that were often as cold as those faced by later modern humans. They occupied sites across glacial Europe, from the Atlantic coast to the Ural Mountains. Their success demonstrates that their combination of biological adaptation and cultural technology was effective. When modern humans arrived in Europe around 40 to 45,000 years ago, they entered a world already occupied. The landscape was not empty but inhabited by competent, experienced people who had mastered its challenges. The caves that modern humans occupied had often previously been Neanderthal homes, the knowledge of which stones made good hearth material, which cave features indicated good shelter, which animals were most suitable for hunting. All of this had been learned by Neanderthals over vast spans of time. There was some interaction between these two human species. Genetic evidence shows interbreeding occurred. There may have been competition for resources, cooperation in some circumstances, conflict in others. The ultimate outcome was the disappearance of Neanderthals and the survival of modern humans, but the process took thousands of years. The question of why Neanderthals eventually disappeared while modern humans survived remains debated. The difference in clothing technology may have played a role, particularly during the coldest phases, when small advantages in thermal efficiency could have meant the difference between survival and failure. But other factors likely contributed as well, including possible differences in hunting strategies, social organization, and population structure. What is clear is that Neanderthals were not primitive or inferior. They were highly successful humans, well adapted to their environment through both biology and culture. They survived in some of the harshest conditions on Earth, for longer than modern humans have yet existed. The modern humans who came north brought their own innovations, particularly in clothing technology, but they also likely learned from the Neanderthals they encountered. The achievement of modern humans in surviving Ice Age Europe built upon a foundation that Neanderthals had laid over hundreds of thousands of years. The difference in clothing technology between Neanderthals and modern humans, if the archaeological evidence is correctly interpreted, represents what might be called the tailoring gap. This gap was not absolute. Neanderthals clearly used animal hides for warmth and protection, But the presence or absence of fitted, sewn clothing created distinct possibilities for cold weather survival. Draped clothing, the form likely used by Neanderthals, involves wrapping hides around the body and securing them with ties, pins, or by tucking. This approach has advantages. It is quick to put on and remove, allowing rapid adjustment to changing conditions. It requires no sewing, and therefore no needles or thread. It can accommodate a range of body sizes with the same hide, making it efficient for growing children or changing conditions. But draped clothing has limitations. The wrapping creates bulk that can restrict movement. More importantly, it creates gaps and openings where cold air can enter and warm air can escape. A hide wrapped around the shoulders might gap at the neck, allowing heat loss. A cloak wrapped around the body might open during movement, exposing the wearer to wind. These gaps become more problematic as the temperature drops. In moderate cold, the heat loss through gaps might be manageable. The body can compensate by increasing metabolic heat production, but in extreme cold, particularly combined with wind, the constant loss of warmed air through gaps can overwhelm the body's ability to maintain core temperature. Fitted, sewn clothing eliminates most of these gaps. A tunic with sewn seams fits close to the body, with openings only at the neck, wrists, and waist. These openings can be made small and can be cinched tight with drawstrings. Sleeves follow the arms closely, preventing gaps from opening during movement. The result is a garment that maintains a sealed envelope of warm air around the body. The difference in thermal efficiency is measurable. A person wearing draped hides might maintain comfort in temperatures of -10 degrees Celsius, but struggle at -20. The same person in fitted sewn clothing might remain comfortable to -30 or below, assuming adequate layering and proper material. This difference of 10 to 20 degrees in comfort range could be critical during the coldest phases of glaciation. It might determine whether a group could remain active and hunt during the coldest weeks of winter, or whether they had to remain sheltered, relying on stored food and risking starvation if supplies ran low. The evidence from Sungheir and other sites shows that modern humans had developed sophisticated, tailored clothing by at least 25,000 years ago. The presence of thousands of beads sewn onto clothing in carefully arranged patterns demonstrates not only the ability to sew but the time and effort invested in creating elaborate garments. These were not crude, functional wrappings but carefully constructed clothing that served both practical and social purposes. The beads themselves, carved from mammoth ivory, represent enormous labor. Each bead required hours to create, drilled and shaped using stone tools. A single garment might have hundreds or thousands of beads, representing weeks or months of work. This investment only makes sense if the underlying garment was valuable and expected to last, suggesting well-made, durable clothing. The pattern of bead placement, preserved in burial contexts, allows reconstruction of the garment forms. The Sungheir burials show beads arranged in ways consistent with tunics, pants, and footwear, all separate pieces that would have been sewn to fit the wearer. This is unambiguous evidence of tailored clothing at a date when Neanderthals were already extinct or nearly so. Whether earlier modern humans, those who first entered Europe 40 to 45,000 years ago, had equally sophisticated clothing is less certain. The evidence becomes sparser as we go back in time, and needles, while present, are less abundant in earlier periods. But the technology was clearly developing, and the advantage it provided would have been significant. This tailoring gap may help explain patterns in the archaeological record. Modern humans appear to have expanded into extremely cold regions, such as the interior of Siberia, more successfully than Neanderthals. While Neanderthals occupied many cold regions, the very coldest areas seem to have been colonized by modern humans, and their superior clothing technology may have made this possible. The gap was not simply about technology, but about the knowledge and skills to use that technology. Making needles required knowing which bones to use and how to shape them. Sewing required understanding how to prepare sinew, how to design garment pieces that would fit together, and how to make seams that were both strong and weatherproof. This knowledge had to be developed and transmitted, becoming part of the cultural inheritance of modern human groups. The survival of Ice Age humans in extreme cold was not the result of a single breakthrough or invention. It was the product of a complex system, a symphony of solutions that worked together to create conditions where life could continue even in the harshest environment. Each element of this system supported and enhanced the others, creating a whole that was greater than the sum of its parts. Fire provided heat, but fire alone was insufficient. The heat radiated outward, dissipating quickly into the cold air. Shelter contained that heat, creating a space where warmth could accumulate. But shelter without fire was still cold, and without proper clothing, the occupants would still lose body heat faster than they could generate it. Clothing trapped body heat, but only if the body was generating heat, which required food and calories. Food had to be hunted or gathered, which required tools and knowledge. Tools had to be made, which required materials and skills. The skills had to be learned, which required social structures that transmitted knowledge across generations. Each element depended on the others. Superior clothing allowed longer hunting trips in cold weather, increasing food availability. Better food meant more energy for processing hides and making clothing. More effective shelters meant better rest, which meant more energy for hunting and gathering. Fire made shelters livable and allowed cooking, which improved nutrition. The social dimension tied everything together. Cooperation allowed division of labor, which meant individuals could specialize and develop higher levels of skill. Shared knowledge meant that innovations could spread and be refined. Communal sleeping meant that the warmth generated by the group multiplied the effectiveness of all other measures. This interconnection created resilience. If one element of the system was temporarily compromised, the others could compensate. If hunting was poor and food scarce, the family could reduce activity and rely more heavily on stored food and efficient use of shelter. If clothing was damaged, additional fire and bedding could provide extra warmth until repairs could be made. The system also allowed adaptation to different environments. In regions where caves were available, less effort needed to be devoted to shelter construction. Where wood was scarce, bone and fat could substitute as fuel. Where certain animals were unavailable, others could provide the needed hides and meat. The principles remained constant, but the specific application varied with local conditions. The development of this integrated survival system took time, likely thousands of years of gradual refinement. Early modern humans entering cold regions probably had less sophisticated versions of the technology. They would have learned through experience what worked and what did not, gradually improving their methods. There may have been failures along the way, groups that did not survive because their technology was insufficient or their knowledge incomplete. The successful groups were those that developed effective solutions and transmitted them reliably to their descendants. Over generations, the system became more refined, more efficient, more reliable. By the last glacial maximum, 20,000 years ago, the humans living in glacial Europe had perfected their survival system. They were not merely enduring the cold, but living full lives, creating art, developing culture, raising families in a world of ice. Their success is evident in the archaeological record, in the widespread distribution of sites, in the evidence of long-term occupation, in the elaborate burials and artwork that indicate people with time and energy for more than bare survival. This was not primitive survival. This was a sophisticated adaptation, the result of accumulated knowledge and refined technology. The people of the Ice Age understood their environment deeply and had developed solutions that worked in harmony with natural principles rather than against them. Their achievement becomes even more impressive when we consider that they did all of this without metals, without mechanical tools, without writing to record their knowledge. They created a sustainable survival system using stone, bone, hide, and wood, powered by fire and human ingenuity, held together by social cooperation and cultural transmission of knowledge. The system they developed was so effective that it allowed humans to spread across the entire globe into every climate zone from the Arctic to the tropics. The same principles that allowed survival in Ice Age Europe supported human expansion into northern Asia, across the Bering Land Bridge into the Americas, and eventually to every habitable continent. The story of Ice Age survival is fundamentally a story of human adaptability. It demonstrates that humans are not adapted to any single environment, but have the capacity to adapt to almost any environment through cultural and technological innovation. This capacity is perhaps the defining characteristic of our species, more important than any physical trait. As daylight faded, a predictable sequence of activities would begin. The transition from the active work of the day to the rest of the night was not abrupt, but followed patterns refined through countless repetitions. These evening routines served multiple purposes, preparing the family physically and psychologically for the vulnerable hours of sleep, while reinforcing the social bonds that sustained survival. The first priority was the fire. Throughout the day, the hearth might have been allowed to burn low, maintaining a bed of coals that could be revived when needed, but not consuming fuel unnecessarily. As evening approached, the fire would be built up again, fresh wood added to create flames that would provide light and warmth for the evening activities. This fire tending was deliberate and attentive. The wood was arranged to produce maximum heat with minimum smoke, creating a comfortable environment for the hours ahead. Stones around the hearth would be positioned to reflect heat toward the areas where the family would gather. The fire became the center of attention, the focal point around which evening life organized itself. Food preparation often occupied the early evening hours. Meat from recent hunts would be cooked, either roasted directly over the flames or boiled in containers made from hide or carved wood. The cooking process provided not only nutrition but also heat, the rising warmth from the fire and the cooking food contributing to the shelter's overall temperature. Cooking was communal work. Some family members prepared the food while others maintained the fire or attended to other tasks. Children might be given small responsibilities, learning through participation. The work created opportunities for conversation, for coordination, for the small interactions that maintained relationships and transmitted knowledge. The meal itself was a social occasion. The family would gather around the hearth to eat, sharing the food that had been prepared. The act of eating together reinforced group identity and provided a regular moment of unity. In times of plenty, the meal brought satisfaction and contentment. In leaner times, it demonstrated shared hardship and mutual support. After the meal, attention turned to maintenance tasks. Tools that had been used during the day needed inspection and care. Stone blades that had dulled needed resharpening or replacement. Wooden shafts that had been stressed needed checking for cracks or damage. This maintenance was essential, as tool failure at a critical moment could mean the difference between successful hunting and dangerous failure. Hide processing might continue into the evening for hides that were in progress. The work of scraping and treating hides was time-consuming and could not always be completed in daylight hours. The firelight allowed this work to continue, though the finer details might be left for brighter conditions. Clothing repair was another evening activity. The constant wear of daily use and the harsh conditions gradually damaged garments. Seams would weaken, requiring reinforcement. Small tears would appear, needing patches. Drawstrings and ties would wear through, needing replacement. This ongoing maintenance kept clothing functional and prevented small problems from becoming large ones. The work was often done by women, though not exclusively. Sewing by firelight required good vision and steady hands, work suited to those with experience and skill. Younger family members would watch and learn, gradually developing the abilities they would need when they had their own clothing to maintain. As full darkness settled, the tempo of activity would gradually slow. The urgent work of the day was done. The fire burned steadily, requiring only occasional attention. The shelter was secure, the family gathered and safe. This was the time for rest, for conversation, for the social activities that sustained mental and emotional well-being through the long winter. The preparation of sleeping areas would begin. The bedding that had been aired or adjusted during the day would be arranged for the night. Furs would be positioned, layers organized to provide maximum warmth. The sleeping platform would be checked to ensure it was level and comfortable, with no protruding branches or stones that could cause discomfort during the night. Individual sleeping spots might be claimed or assigned, though the communal nature of the sleeping area meant that positions were flexible. Children would typically sleep between parents or near them, providing both warmth and supervision. The arrangement reflected both practical concerns about heat sharing and social concerns about family structure. As people settled into their sleeping positions, final adjustments would be made. Clothing would be loosened or removed as appropriate, finding the balance between warmth and comfort. Outer layers that were bulky or restrictive might be removed and used as additional blankets. Inner layers that provided insulation without bulk would be retained. The fire would be banked for the night, partially covered with ash to slow its burning while maintaining a bed of hot coals that would last until morning. This was skilled work, requiring judgment about how much fuel to leave, how much to cover, how to arrange things so the fire would neither burn out completely nor consume fuel too rapidly. A family member would be designated for fire watch, responsible for maintaining the hearth through the night. This person might sleep lightly, waking periodically to check the fire and add fuel if needed. Or the responsibility might rotate, with different people taking turns through the night, each sleeping for a period then waking to tend the fire before waking the next person. The transition to sleep was gradual. Conversation would continue for a time, voices becoming quieter as people relaxed. Children who were still awake might be told stories or sung to, traditional methods of easing them into sleep. Adults might discuss the next day's plans or simply enjoy the quiet comfort of the family gathered safely together. The sounds of settling would fade gradually. The rustle of people adjusting their positions, the small sounds of final preparations, would diminish. The shelter would grow quiet, except for the crackle of the fire, the breathing of sleeping family members, and the occasional sounds from outside, wind or the distant calls of animals. This ritual, repeated night after night, created structure and predictability. It marked the boundary between day and night, between activity and rest. It provided psychological comfort, a familiar sequence that reassured even in uncertain times. The settling ritual was not merely practical preparation for sleep, but a daily affirmation of safety, family, and the continuation of life in a challenging world. The night passed in its own rhythm, different from the activity of day but not empty or static. The shelter remained alive with small sounds and movements, the breathing of sleeping people, the occasional crackle of the fire, the subtle adjustments of bodies seeking comfort. The fire watch maintained a quiet vigilance. The person responsible would wake periodically, rising carefully to avoid disturbing others, moving to the hearth to assess its condition. The glow of the coals provided enough light to work by, casting a warm orange illumination across the sleeping area. If the fire had burned low, fuel would be added carefully. Small pieces first, positioned to catch heat from the coals without smothering them. The new wood would begin to smoke, then catch, flames spreading gradually. The fire tender would watch to ensure the flames established properly, adding more fuel once the initial pieces were burning well. This work was done quietly, with practiced efficiency. Too much noise or activity would wake sleepers unnecessarily. The goal was to maintain the fire while allowing the family to rest undisturbed. It was intimate work, a caretaking that protected the family and their vulnerability. Once the fire was stable, The fire tender might remain awake for a short time, watching the flames, listening to the night sounds, ensuring all was well. This quiet solitude had its own value, a peaceful moment of reflection in the midst of communal life. Then they would return to the sleeping area, settling back into their furs, allowing sleep to return. The cycle would repeat multiple times through the night. The fire required attention every few hours to maintain adequate warmth. Different family members might take turns, or one person might accept responsibility for the entire night, sleeping more heavily the following night while others handled the watch. Occasionally, other needs would interrupt sleep. A child might wake, requiring comfort or needing to relieve themselves. The entrance tunnel served as the latrine area, far enough from the sleeping space for hygiene but close enough for safety and convenience. Parents would help young children with this, guiding them carefully in the dim firelight. Adults too would wake periodically for similar needs. The movement was minimal, disturbing the sleeping area as little as possible. The cold outside the sleeping furs provided strong incentive to complete necessary tasks quickly and return to warmth. Sometimes someone would wake from a dream or from discomfort, unable to immediately return to sleep. They might lie quiet, listening to the breathing of family members, watching the fires glow, allowing their mind to wander. These wakeful periods were not distressing but simply part of the night's pattern. Sleep would return eventually. The quality of sleep in Ice Age shelters was likely different from modern patterns. Without artificial lighting or fixed schedules, sleep would have been more flexible, following natural rhythms of darkness and body needs. People might have slept more in winter than in summer, responding to the longer nights and reduced daylight activity. There is evidence from studies of people living without artificial light that natural sleep patterns involve periods of wakefulness during the night. A first sleep of several hours, then a wakeful period of an hour or two, then a second sleep until morning. During the wakeful period, people might attend to various needs, stoke fires, think or talk quietly. This pattern might have been common in Ice Age shelters, a natural rhythm that was not seen as problematic, but simply as the normal way sleep occurred. The shelter's temperature would vary through the night. Warmest in the evening when the fire was built high, it would cool gradually as night progressed, reaching its lowest point in the hours before dawn. The sleeping arrangements, with their layers of insulation and communal warmth, helped buffer these changes, maintaining comfortable conditions even as ambient temperature dropped. Condensation could be a concern in shelters, where the temperature difference between inside and outside was substantial. Warm, moist air from breathing and bodies could condense on cold surfaces, creating dampness. Proper ventilation helped manage this, allowing moisture to escape rather than accumulating. The management of ventilation was part of the evening routine, adjusting openings to balance fresh air with heat retention. Outside sounds occasionally penetrated the shelter. Wind might howl around the entrance. Snow might fall with a soft whisper. Animals might call in the distance. These sounds were familiar, expected, and therefore not alarming. They were part of the normal soundscape of Ice Age nights. Only unusual sounds, something unexpected or threatening, would trigger alert wakefulness. The darkness was never complete. The fire provided constant illumination, however dim. Eyes adjusted to the low light could navigate the shelter space, could see the sleeping forms of family members, could monitor the fire's condition. This minimal light was sufficient for safety, while allowing sleep to continue undisturbed. As dawn approached, the quality of light would begin to change. In regions where the sun still rose and set, the first hints of daylight would appear, the darkness outside the shelter shifting from absolute black to grey. In regions experiencing polar night, the change was more subtle, perhaps a slight increase in the twilight that passed for day. The family would wake gradually. Those naturally early to wake would stir first, moving quietly to avoid disturbing others. The fire would be built up, providing light and warmth as people transitioned from sleep to wakefulness. As movement and voices increased, others would wake, emerging from under the furs to begin another day. The content and quality of dreams in Ice Age shelters is something we can only speculate about, but the act of dreaming itself was certainly a regular part of the nightly experience. Dreams are a universal human phenomenon, occurring during specific stages of sleep that would have been present in Ice Age peoples just as they are in modern humans. The environment in which people slept would have influenced dream content in ways both obvious and subtle. The physical sensations of the sleeping body, the sounds and smells of the shelter, the recent experiences of the day, all of these would have provided material that the sleeping mind could incorporate into dreams. The cold itself might have featured in dreams, particularly if the sleeper became too cool during the night. Dreams of cold, of ice, of struggling through snow might have reflected the body's attempt to signal that warmth was needed. Such dreams might wake the sleeper, prompting them to adjust their position, pull furs closer, or move nearer to others for warmth. Conversely, comfortable warmth might have produced pleasant dream sensations, contributing to restful sleep. The feeling of being warm and safe, surrounded by family, protected from the threatening world outside, would have created positive emotional and physical states conducive to peaceful dreams. The sounds of the shelter would have been incorporated into dreams. The crackle of the fire might have become something else in the dream world, transformed by the sleeping mind into speech or other sounds. The breathing of other sleepers, the small movements and adjustments people made during the night, all of this sensory input could have been woven into dream narratives. Recent experiences would certainly have influenced dream content, as they do for modern humans. A successful hunt might have been relived in dreams, the excitement and satisfaction replayed by the sleeping mind. A dangerous encounter, perhaps with a predator or during difficult travel, might have appeared in dreams as well, the sleeping mind processing fear and stress through dream imagery. Cultural content would have shaped dreams in important ways. The stories told around the fire, the myths and legends that formed the group's shared understanding of the world, would have provided symbols and narratives that appeared in dreams. These shared cultural elements meant that dreams were not purely individual, but connected to the collective imagination of the group. Some dreams might have been interpreted as significant, carrying meaning beyond mere sleep phenomena. Many cultures view certain dreams as messages, warnings, or glimpses of spiritual realities. Ice Age peoples may have had similar beliefs, treating some dreams as important and worthy of discussion and interpretation. Morning conversations might have included dream sharing. Someone might describe a vivid or troubling dream, seeking interpretation, or simply sharing the experience. These conversations would have been another way that the group maintained cohesion, sharing inner experiences as they shared physical space and resources. Children's dreams might have been particularly attended to. A child frightened by a nightmare might have been comforted, the dream discussed and its power diffused through parental attention. This would have been part of the broader work of raising children in a challenging environment, helping them process fears and develop resilience. The psychological function of dreams, processing experiences and emotions, consolidating memories and learning, would have been as important for Ice Age peoples as for modern humans. The skills being learned, the environmental knowledge being acquired, the social relationships being navigated, all of this would have been processed during sleep, contributing to the development of competent, knowledgeable adults. Dreams of warmth and plenty might have provided psychological relief during times of hardship. The sleeping mind could create experiences of abundance, of comfort, of security, even when waking reality was difficult. This might have helped maintain morale, providing a form of mental escape that supported resilience. Conversely, anxiety dreams during times of uncertainty or danger would have reflected the stress the group was experiencing. But these dreams too served functions, allowing the mind to rehearse responses to threats, to process fears, to prepare emotionally for challenges. The quality of sleep, and therefore of dreaming, would have been affected by many factors. Adequate food intake supported good sleep. Hunger disrupted it. The level of physical exertion during the day influenced how deeply people slept. Extreme fatigue produced deep, dream-rich sleep. Insufficient activity led to lighter, less restorative rest. The social context of sleeping communally might have influenced dream content as well. The presence of family members, their movements and sounds, their breathing and occasional sleep vocalizations, all of this created a soundscape that was part of the dreaming mind's environment. Dreams might have incorporated these elements, creating narratives in which family members appeared as characters. The transition from sleep to wakefulness began gently. The first person to wake would move carefully, not wanting to disturb others still sleeping. They might lie quietly for a time, gathering themselves, feeling the warmth of the furs and the sleeping bodies nearby, reluctant to leave that comfort for the cooler air beyond. Eventually, necessity or responsibility would prompt movement. The person might rise to tend the fire, adding fuel to bring it back to full life. The fire had been banked through the night and would need attention to serve the morning's needs. Wood would be added carefully, positioned to catch quickly and build heat. As the fire grew, its light and warmth would begin to fill the shelter more fully. This was the signal that day had begun, that the time for sleep was passing. Others would begin to wake, some naturally, others roused by the increasing activity and light. Waking was not rushed. People would emerge from under the furs gradually, adjusting to the cooler air, pulling on outer layers of clothing that had been removed for sleeping. There was no schedule to keep, no external demand for sudden wakefulness. The day would begin when people were ready. The fire became the gathering point, as it had been the previous evening. People would move toward its warmth, seeking comfort as they fully woke. This morning gathering was social, a time for quiet conversation, for sharing how the night had passed, for discussing the day ahead. Morning routines included personal hygiene within the limits of what was practical. Faces and hands might be cleaned, though water was often scarce and cold. The use of snow for cleaning was possible but not always comfortable. Personal cleanliness was balanced against the difficulty of achieving it and the need to conserve warmth. Food was a morning priority. Breaking the overnight fast with a meal provided energy for the day ahead. The meal might be simple, perhaps leftover meat from the previous evening warmed over the fire, or it might be more substantial if food was plentiful and time allowed preparation. The cooking process, like in the evening, was communal and social. Multiple people might be involved, some preparing food, others maintaining the fire, others gathering implements or supplies. Children might help with simple tasks, learning through participation. As people ate, conversation would turn to the day's plans. What needed to be done? Who would do what? Were there pressing priorities, or could the day follow a more relaxed pace? These discussions were informal but important, coordinating the group's activities and ensuring necessary tasks were addressed. The weather outside would be assessed. Someone might venture to the entrance to look out, gauge the temperature, check the wind, observe the sky. This information would influence decisions about outdoor activities. Severe weather might mean a day spent primarily indoors. Better conditions would allow hunting, gathering, or other necessary work outside the shelter. Equipment and tools would be checked. Hunters preparing for the day would examine their weapons, making sure spears were intact, points secure, shafts straight. Clothing would be adjusted, layers added or removed based on the expected conditions and planned activities. Those remaining at the shelter would have their own tasks. Maintenance of the living space required attention. Bedding might need to be aired or adjusted. The hearth area might need clearing of accumulated ash. Supplies would be organized and monitored. The transition from the intimacy of nighttime sleep to the more dispersed activities of the day involved both physical and psychological shifts. The close proximity of the sleeping arrangement gave way to more individual space and activity. The quiet of night was replaced by the voices and movements of an active household. Children, having slept deeply and well, would be full of energy in the morning. They would need supervision and direction, their natural enthusiasm channeled toward useful activities or appropriate play. The adults would balance allowing children freedom with ensuring they remained safe and contributed to the family's needs. Elders, who might move more slowly in the morning, would participate at their own pace. They might remain near the fire, while younger members engaged in more active work. Their presence and their knowledge remained valuable even as their physical capacity declined with age. The morning was also a time for teaching. As activities began, younger members would watch and learn from those with more experience. A teenager preparing to accompany hunters might observe weapons preparation carefully, noting techniques and asking questions. A child helping prepare food would absorb methods and recipes through participation. The light, such as it was during winter, would be used efficiently. Tasks requiring good visibility would be prioritized for the hours when light was best. Work that could be done by firelight or that required less precision could be saved for dimmer times. The morning routine, like the evening settling ritual, provided structure and predictability. It marked the transition from night to day, from rest to activity. It reinforced roles and relationships within the family, and it prepared everyone, physically and mentally, for whatever the day would bring. As the morning progressed and the immediate tasks of waking and breaking fast were completed, the family would disperse to their various activities. Hunters might depart for the day. Others might work near the shelter on maintenance or processing tasks. The pattern of daily life would reassert itself, different from, but built upon the foundation of the night's rest. The cycle would continue, day following night following day, through the long Ice Age winter. Each dawn brought renewal. Each evening brought return to the warmth and safety of the shelter. This rhythm sustained life, providing the structure within which survival became possible, and life could continue even in the harshest conditions imaginable. The survival of Ice Age humans through the coldest nights was not the result of any single innovation, but rather the seamless integration of multiple elements working in concert. Each component of their survival system enhanced the others, creating a whole far more effective than any individual part could have been alone. Fire provided the foundation. Without it, the most sophisticated shelter would have remained too cold for sustained occupation. The most carefully tailored clothing would have been insufficient for sleep. But fire alone, burning in the open, dissipated its heat uselessly into the vast cold. It needed containment, direction, management. Shelter provided that containment. Cave walls or constructed dwellings trapped the heat produced by fire, creating spaces where warmth could accumulate rather than escape. The shelter blocked wind that would have stripped heat away from bodies and fire alike. It created a boundary between the protected interior and the hostile exterior, a threshold that marked the difference between survival and death. But shelter without proper bedding would have conducted heat away through the ground, making sleep uncomfortable and potentially dangerous. The layered sleeping platforms addressed this, creating insulation that broke the conductive pathway between body and frozen earth. Branches, grasses, and hides combined to trap air and prevent heat loss downward. Clothing sealed the system at the individual level. Even in a warm shelter, a naked person would lose heat to the air around them. Clothing trapped body heat, creating a personal microclimate that moved with the individual. The multiple layers, the fitted construction, the careful attention to closures and openings all served to maximize heat retention while allowing necessary mobility and comfort. Material science underlay all of these elements. The knowledge of which woods burned best, which stones could withstand repeated heating, which hides provided optimal insulation, which plants made suitable bedding, All of this represented accumulated understanding built over generations. This knowledge was as important as any physical tool, perhaps more so. Social organization made the entire system possible. The division of labor allowed specialization and skill development. The transmission of knowledge ensured that each generation did not need to rediscover solutions, but could build upon inherited wisdom. The sharing of resources meant that temporary individual failures did not lead to death, but could be compensated by the group's collective success. Cooperation extended to the sleeping arrangement itself. The communal huddle multiplied the effectiveness of all other measures. Individual body heat, which might have been insufficient alone, became adequate when combined with others. The psychological comfort of sleeping among family reduced stress and supported the deep rest necessary for health. The system was also flexible, able to adapt to varying conditions and resources. In regions where wood was scarce, bone and fat could substitute as fuel. Where caves were unavailable, structures could be built. Where certain animals were absent, others could provide the needed materials. The principles remained constant, but their application could be modified to fit local circumstances. This flexibility also extended to seasonal and situational adjustments. During the coldest periods, all elements of the system would be employed at maximum effectiveness. Every layer of clothing would be worn, fires would be maintained constantly, sleeping arrangements would be optimized for warmth. During milder periods, the system could be relaxed, reducing fuel consumption and allowing greater comfort. The redundancy built into the system provided resilience. If one element failed temporarily, others could compensate. If hunting was poor and food energy was limited, additional clothing and closer sleeping could offset reduced metabolic heat. If clothing was damaged, more time near the fire and thicker bedding could maintain warmth until repairs were completed. The system's effectiveness is demonstrated by its success. Ice Age humans not only survived but spread across the coldest regions of the planet. They established populations in environments where survival required the full application of their technological and social capabilities. The archaeological record shows long-term occupation of sites, generation after generation returning to the same shelters, using the same strategies, achieving consistent success. This consistency points to another important aspect of the system, its sustainability. The resources required were renewable within the natural cycles of the environment. Animals reproduced, providing continuous supplies of meat and hide. Plants regrew each summer, offering materials for bedding and fuel. Wood and bone accumulated naturally. The system did not deplete its resource base, but existed in balance with the environment's capacity to provide. The knowledge required to maintain this system was preserved through oral tradition and practical demonstration. Children learned by watching and participating, absorbing skills and understanding through the natural process of growing up within the culture. This knowledge transmission was reliable enough that the system persisted for thousands of years, with only gradual modification and improvement. The Ice Age survival system represents a remarkable achievement of human ingenuity. It demonstrates the capacity of humans to analyze problems, develop solutions, and refine those solutions through iteration and experience. It shows the power of cultural knowledge and social cooperation to overcome environmental challenges that would defeat any individual. Modern humans, living in climate-controlled environments with advanced technology, may find it difficult to appreciate the sophistication of Ice Age survival methods. But these methods worked, and they worked reliably, in conditions that would kill an unprepared modern person within hours. The achievement deserves recognition not as primitive survival, but as sophisticated adaptation to extreme circumstances. The connection between Ice Age peoples and modern humans extends beyond simple ancestry. The fundamental needs that drove their survival strategies remain present in our biology and psychology, even when modern technology has eliminated the immediate threats those needs evolved to address. The human body still responds to cold as it did 20,000 years ago. core temperature must be maintained within a narrow range for survival. The same physiological responses that protected Ice Age humans activate in modern people, exposed to cold, vasoconstriction in the extremities to preserve heat for vital organs, shivering to generate metabolic heat, the urge to seek shelter and warmth. The need for shelter, for a secure place to rest, remains deeply embedded in human psychology. The comfort of being indoors, protected from the elements, reflects instincts that were literally survival requirements for our ancestors. The desire to make spaces warm and comfortable, to control temperature, and create pleasant environments, echoes the work Ice Age peoples did to make their shelters livable. The social nature of human sleep patterns also reflects our Ice Age heritage. While modern people often sleep alone or in couples, there remains something fundamentally comforting about sleeping near others. Children naturally seek the proximity of parents when sleeping. Adults often report better sleep when sharing space with trusted others. These preferences reflect millions of years of mammalian evolution and thousands of years of human cultural practice. The technology of insulation, so central to Ice Age survival, remains central to modern life. The principle of trapping air in small pockets to prevent heat transfer is used in everything from winter clothing to home insulation to sleeping bags. Modern materials may be synthetic rather than natural, but the underlying physics are identical. We still rely on the same principles that Ice Age peoples discovered and applied. The importance of fire has translated into modern heating systems. While we no longer tend open flames in our living spaces, we maintain carefully controlled heat sources that serve the same purpose, creating warm environments where human bodies can function comfortably. The central heating system is a direct descendant of the Ice Age hearth, using different technology but serving the identical need. Even specific design elements echo across time. Modern sleeping platforms, raised off the floor, serve the same purpose as Ice Age platforms, preventing heat loss through conduction to a cold surface. The use of mattresses and bedding to create insulation between body and sleeping surface applies the same principles as layers of grass and fur. The comfort we seek in beds reflects needs that are ancient and deep. The social organization that enabled Ice Age survival also has modern parallels. Humans remain intensely social creatures, dependent on cooperation and shared knowledge. While modern society is vastly more complex than Ice Age bands, the fundamental reliance on others for survival and well-being continues. No individual possesses all necessary knowledge and skills. We all depend on the accumulated expertise of our culture, transmitted through education and experience. The specific knowledge that ensured survival in the Ice Age has largely been lost, replaced by knowledge relevant to modern circumstances. But the capacity for accumulating and transmitting knowledge remains. The human ability to learn, to build upon previous generations' achievements, to develop increasingly sophisticated solutions to problems, this continues to drive human adaptation and success. Some people and cultures maintain knowledge more closely connected to Ice Age survival practices. Indigenous peoples in Arctic regions still use variations of traditional clothing, shelter, and hunting techniques. While modern materials and tools have been incorporated, the underlying strategies often remain rooted in ancient wisdom. These peoples demonstrate that the old methods, while developed long ago, remain effective when properly applied. The modern outdoor and survival communities have also rediscovered and relearned many Ice Age techniques, recreating shelters from natural materials, making fire without modern tools, processing hides for clothing. These activities connect modern practitioners with ancient methods. The experience often generates profound respect for the skill and knowledge of Ice Age peoples. There is also growing recognition of what has been lost. Modern comfort comes at the cost of disconnection from natural rhythms and reduced resilience to environmental challenges. A modern person suddenly deprived of technology would struggle to survive in conditions that Ice Age humans navigated routinely. This fragility is the price of specialization and technological dependence. Some researchers and educators work to preserve and teach traditional survival skills, recognizing their value both as historical knowledge and as practical capabilities. Learning to create shelter, make fire, process materials, and apply the principles of insulation provides insights into human capability and resourcefulness that pure theoretical knowledge cannot match. The psychological aspects of Ice Age survival also offer lessons. The ability to maintain morale and cohesion during extended hardship, to find meaning and create culture even in challenging circumstances, to support family and community through difficult times, these capabilities remain relevant. Modern people facing crises can learn from the resilience and adaptability of their Ice Age ancestors. The story of Ice Age survival is ultimately a story about human potential. It demonstrates that humans, while individually vulnerable, become remarkably capable when working together and applying accumulated knowledge. The same capacities that allowed survival in glacial Europe support human achievement in all circumstances, from exploring space to building civilizations to creating art and knowledge.